Racist cop wrongfully arrests black doctor, regrets it for life. You ever see someone get cuffed so fast, you'd think saving a life was a crime? That's what happened today. Dr. Elijah Brooks stepped out of the emergency room covered in blood, not his, but a child's he just brought back from the brink. It started on a Monday, which always seemed cursed at St. Luke's Trauma Center. The kind of day where coffee goes cold before the first sip, and the waiting room smells like burnt nerves and hospital bleach. Elijah had been on call since 3 a.m., bouncing between 3 code blues and a pileup from I-95 that filled every bay. He hadn't sat down in 6 hours, and the blood on his scrubs was a mix of sweat and miracles. Then his pager screened. 8-year-old Jamal Simmons. Gunshot wound. Multiple entry points. ETA 2 minutes. Elijah barely had time to pull on gloves before the boy was wheeled in, limp and pale, his mother sobbing behind the stretcher. It was chaos, but Elijah thrived in chaos. He shouted orders with precision, cracked open the kid's chest with practiced hands, and worked with the rhythm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times but never lost the urgency of the first. The boy flatlined once. Then again. Elijah didn't flinch. His hands stayed steady, his voice calm, even as the ER nurses looked away, expecting death to win this round. Then against every odd there was a heartbeat. They stabilized Jamal, got him to the ER. The mother collapsed into Elijah's arms, weeping thanks like he'd just raised her son from the grave. It was 7:03 a.m. when he finally stepped outside to breathe. And that's when it happened. Officer Dan Keller had been sitting in his patrol car, parked half-assed across 2 handicapped spots like he owned the place. A radio call had mentioned suspicious activity at the ER entrance, someone matching the description of a carjacking suspect. Black male, tall, blood-stained clothes. That's all Keller needed. Elijah barely had time to wipe his forehead before Keller was out of his car, gun drawn, barking commands like a man itching for war. Get your hands where I can see them. Elijah blinked, stunned, hand still on the door handle. I work here, he said, voice low but firm. I'm a doctor. Hands. Now. Elijah raised his hand slowly. He didn't want to give Keller a reason, but it didn't matter. The cuffs came out before the questions did. In 30 seconds, Elijah Brooks, top of his class at Howard Med, decorated trauma surgeon, and the man who had just saved a child's life was face down on the concrete with a knee in his back and the smell of gun oil in his nose. What's in your pockets? Keller snarled. Drugs? Stolen phone. Elijah said nothing. There was nothing to say. Not until Keller yanked his ID from his scrub pocket and stared at it like it had to be fake. What the hell is this? My name. My job. My life, Elijah said through clenched teeth. People had started gathering, nurses, patients, even Jamal's mother, who screamed louder than the sirens. That's the doctor who saved my baby. What are you doing? She cried, clawing at Keller's uniform. It didn't matter. It never mattered at first. Keller didn't uncuff him until the attending physician Dr. Nguyen stormed outside with hospital security and a face full of fury. That man is the reason a little boy isn't dead right now, she snapped. You need to leave. Now. But Keller didn't leave. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. He stepped back, sure, muttered something about doing his job, but the damage was done. Elijah sat in the staff locker room 2 hours later, the cuffs having left angry red marks on his wrists. He stared at his own reflection, blood still on his neck, bruises already blooming, and felt something deep and familiar, not rage, but weariness. A kind of exhaustion that no coffee or nap could fix. This wasn't the first time he'd been mistaken for anything but what he was. But it was the first time it had happened while a child's heartbeat still echoed in his hands. He tried to file a report. The hospital offered support, weak and hollow. The police department shrugged. He matched a description, they said. We'll investigate, they said. No apology. No accountability. Just another black man in the wrong place, his workplace. But someone did notice. Her name was Alana Trent. Investigative reporter. Sharp, unrelenting, and as angry as Elijah. She heard about the arrest from a nurse who couldn't stop crying over what she'd witnessed. Alana called Elijah that night. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to relive it. But she listened, really listened. And after an hour, he said one word that cracked everything open. Okay, tell the story. Okay, make them see. Alana ran the story 2 days later. It went viral by noon. The footage from a security camera, Keller slamming Elijah against the wall, the handcuffs, The screams looped on every major network. Social media lit up. Celebrities tweeted. Doctors across the country posted in solidarity. The hospital tried to save face with a press release. The police department issued a vague statement. Keller was placed on administrative leave. But the heat didn't die down. Not this time. Because this time, the man they cuffed had saved a child's life, and the world could see it in high-definition injustice. For Keller, the fallout was immediate. The mayor called for a formal investigation. Protesters showed up at precinct headquarters. His name trended for the wrong reasons. And when his own teenage daughter came home crying because her classmates asked if her dad was the racist cop, something in him cracked. He watched the body cam footage. Then he watched the hospital security footage. Then he watched the interview with Elijah, not angry, not vengeful, just tired. "I don't want him fired," Elijah said. "I want him to understand what he did. Not just to me, but to every black doctor who walks into a hospital and wonders if his badge matters less than his skin." That was the moment Keller started to regret. Not because he lost face or was facing suspension, but because for the first time, he actually saw the man he'd put on the ground. Not a suspect, not a threat, just a human being who saved lives while he assumed the worst. He showed up at the hospital 3 weeks later. Not in uniform, no camera crews, just a man who didn't know what to say. Elijah was coming off a double shift. He looked at Keller like a man who'd read this chapter before. "I'm not here to defend myself," Keller said quietly. "I'm here to tell you I was wrong. And I'm sorry." Elijah didn't say anything at first. Then he said, "Okay." But it didn't mean forgiveness. Not yet. Not like that. Keller stood in that hallway like a man waiting for a verdict, not an answer. He hadn't slept. Not really. The memory of Elijah's face, confused, calm, then betrayed, kept replaying in his mind, louder than any body cam footage. Elijah glanced at the clock on the wall. "Walk with me," he said. They stepped into the hallway, past the nurse's station, where eyes followed them, but no one said a word. Elijah didn't introduce Keller. He didn't explain. He just walked, steady and quiet, until they reached the pediatric wing. Through the glass, Jamal Simmons lay in a hospital bed surrounded by balloons and stuffed animals. His mother sat by his side, humming something soft, brushing his hair with fingers that had shaken the day Elijah brought him back. "You see that boy?" Elijah said, voice low. "You were cuffing me while I still had his blood on my hands." Keller looked down, ashamed. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Elijah cut in. "You didn't ask." Silence stretched between them, heavy as the ventilators behind the walls. "You ever been arrested?" Elijah asked. Keller shook his head. "You ever been mistaken for someone just because of your skin?" "No." "Then you don't know what it's like to be saving a life and still fear for your own." Elijah's voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. Every word landed like weight on Keller's shoulders. "I'm not perfect," Keller said. "But I didn't wake up that morning thinking, 'Let me go ruin a good man's life.' I just reacted. I thought I was protecting someone." "From me?" Elijah asked, eyebrows raised. "A man in scrubs walking out of a hospital?" Keller had no answer. "You ever think," Elijah said, "that maybe what you were protecting was a lie someone taught you a long time ago?" That hit. Because it was true. Keller grew up in a suburb outside Raleigh. All white schools. His dad was a cop. His grandfather, too. Men who called black folks colored behind closed doors and told him to be careful whenever he had to drive through certain neighborhoods. He never questioned it. Never had to. Until now. Until Elijah Brooks. Keller left the hospital that day without asking for forgiveness. He knew it wasn't his to demand. But something in him shifted. Something deep. He started reading, listening, attending community town halls, even when it made him uncomfortable. Especially then. He showed up at an anti-bias training session at the precinct and stayed late, asking questions. He sat with community leaders, listened to stories from black doctors, lawyers, barbers, people he'd once subconsciously seen as exceptions to a rule he'd never realized he believed in. Meanwhile, Elijah kept working, saving lives, avoiding headlines. He turned down interviews, declined a book deal. His face had become a symbol, but he never wanted to be famous for surviving a trauma he didn't choose. He just wanted to be a doctor. But things had changed. One afternoon, a young black boy named Marcus was brought in after a bike accident. Nothing life-threatening, but his mother held his hand like the world might fall apart. When Elijah walked in, she looked up and her eyes welled with tears. "You're him," she whispered. "I'm Dr. Brooks," he said, trying to keep it clinical. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're the one who got arrested for saving someone. My son, he said he wants to be like you." Elijah paused. That hit different. Because for years he'd worked twice as hard to be seen as just a doctor. Not a black doctor. Just a professional. Now, he realized, being seen for all of who he was might be just as important. A month later, Keller requested to see him again. Elijah met him in a coffee shop near the hospital. "I'm not here to bother you," Keller said. "I just want to tell you something." Elijah nodded cautiously. "I've stepped down from active patrol duty," Keller said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" "Yes." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter addressed to the department. In it, Keller cited a need for self-reckoning and accountability. He asked to be reassigned to internal training and community outreach. "I can't undo what I did to you," Keller said, "but I can try to change what I do going forward and help other officers question what I didn't." Elijah read the letter in silence. He didn't say thank you, didn't offer absolution, but he nodded once, and somehow that felt like enough. Weeks passed, then months. Elijah testified before the State Committee on Police Accountability, not to seek revenge, but reform. His words were calm, clear, and backed by the statistics he'd seen too often in his own trauma: too many black boys with police-inflicted injuries, too few consequences. Hospitals across the country invited him to speak on implicit bias in emergency care. Medical schools added his case to their curriculum not as a tragedy, but a turning point. And Keller? He followed through. He helped develop a program where officers were required to spend a week shadowing personnel, ride-alongs in reverse. He spoke to cadets about what it meant to hesitate, to check your prejudice before your trigger finger. He even invited Elijah to speak during the department's annual training summit. "I'm not your redemption story," Elijah said. "I know," Keller replied. "You're the man who saved a life while I was too blind to see yours." Elijah stood in front of 200 officers that day, some of whom looked at him like he didn't belong. He told them the story anyway. He didn't dramatize it, didn't lecture. He just spoke the truth. "I'm not asking for your guilt," he said. "I'm asking for your courage. The kind it takes to admit you're wrong, to change, to protect everyone equally, not just the ones who look like you." And in the silence after his speech, a few of those officers stood. Then more. Not applause, just quiet acknowledgement. Elijah didn't need their claps. He needed their understanding. Back at St. Luke's, things started to shift. Not magically, not overnight. But residents who looked like Elijah no longer felt invisible. Security guards checked their biases. Staff held meetings about equity that weren't just lip service. And when Jamal was finally discharged, his mother hugged Elijah like he was family. "You gave me my son," she said. "And you gave this whole city something to wake up to." Elijah smiled, tired but proud. He hadn't planned on being a symbol. But if his pain could become a blueprint for something better, to carry it. One day, he walked past the old entrance where it all started, the spot where he'd been cuffed. The wall still bore a faint scrape from where his ID had fallen to the ground. A new sign had been installed. A bronze plaque, clean and understated. In honor of Dr. Elijah Brooks. For his service, strength, and courage in and out of the ER. Elijah stood in front of it, alone, the hum of the city behind him. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself feel it all. The pain, the injustice, the transformation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was Jamal, smiling, holding a crayon drawing of a doctor. The doctor was brown-skinned, wearing a white coat, and next to him stood a police officer, also brown-skinned, also smiling. Elijah tucked it back into his wallet and whispered, "Let's keep going." Because the story wasn't over. Not yet. But now, it was being written differently. The seasons changed. Leaves turned to fire, then frost. Snow fell lightly outside St. Luke's windows, dusting the sidewalks where sirens never stopped and lives were saved or lost minute by minute. Inside, Dr. Elijah Brooks moved through it all like gravity itself, silent, necessary, always pulling people back from the edge. But even as he went back to stitching wounds and breaking bad news, his name kept traveling. Not as a headline. Not anymore. Now, it was something deeper. A quiet force. A story passed from hand to hand in hospital break rooms, police academies, and college classrooms. And still, he didn't ask for recognition. He just worked. Until one morning, something came across his desk that gave him pause. It was a letter. Handwritten. Neat, deliberate script. Signed. Dan Keller. It wasn't long. Just a single page. Elijah. I didn't want to call. I didn't want to ask for your time again. But I needed you to know. I'm leaving the force. Not in disgrace. Not because they forced me. But because I finally understood that the kind of cop I was trained to be isn't the kind this country needs. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. You showed me that. I've been working with kids, high schoolers, mostly. Teaching them about law enforcement, yes, but also about fear. About what fear does when it wears a badge. How power without humility becomes danger. You were right. Understanding is harder than guilt. But it's worth it. Last week, a boy raised his hand and said he wanted to be a doctor like you. Not me. You. And I thought, thank God. So thank you. Not for forgiving me. I don't expect that. But for holding a mirror to my face and letting me see what I never dared look at. Take care of yourself. Dan. Elijah sat with the letter for a long time. Not smiling. Not angry. Just still. He thought about the things that don't make headlines. The quiet remorse, the learning, the internal shifts that no camera catches. He thought about the boy in Keller's letter. And Jamal. And the next generation who would grow up knowing both the weight and the light of this story. The next day, Elijah placed the letter in a small wooden box he kept in his apartment. Inside were other things. A stethoscope from his residency days. The scrub top from the morning of the arrest. A photo of his mother on her graduation day. And now, Keller's letter. Artifacts of a life both fractured and whole. That afternoon, Elijah walked into a community town hall meeting held in the church basement down the block. It smelled like old wood and warm bread. He didn't usually attend these things anymore. But tonight, he had a reason. The room was packed. Parents, pastors, teens. One side wore medical scrubs. The other wore blue uniforms. But nobody stood apart. The topic, building trust. Elijah was invited to speak. Not as a victim, but as a guide. He stood behind the mic, looked around the room, and started with a story. I was arrested in front of this hospital, he said, pointing toward the window, for looking like someone who didn't belong. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Some heads bowed. Others nodded. That morning, I saved a boy's life. Then I had to fight for mine. He let the silence sit. But something strange happened after that, he continued. The man who cuffed me changed. He didn't have to, but he did. He listened. And because he listened, I started to speak louder. Not just about what happened to me, but what happens every day to people who don't wear white coats, who don't have cameras to protect them. He paused. Justice isn't revenge, he said. It's responsibility. And healing doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth. Applause followed, not thunderous, but real. After the meeting, an older woman approached him. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp. My grandson's a rookie cop, she said. He talks about you like you're some kind of legend. I'm just a man, Elijah said. Maybe, she smiled. But legends start with men who refuse to look away. He walked home under a quiet sky, the cold crisp and clean. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere else, a heart stopped and would start again under someone else's hands. The world kept turning, not kinder, but more awake. And Elijah knew something now that he hadn't known when he lay face down in that parking lot. Change wasn't a miracle. It was a choice, made over and over, by people who dared to face their reflection and become better. 2 months later, he got a call from Jamal's mother. Jamal wanted to visit the ERTOC where his hero worked. Elijah cleared it with the hospital, then met them at the front entrance. Jamal had grown taller. His eyes sparkled with that bright, stubborn light kids have when they've survived something too big for their age. You really work here? Jamal asked, wide-eyed. I really do, Elijah smiled. They toured the trauma bay. Jamal asked about every tool, every beep, every line on every monitor. Does it ever scare you? He asked. Sometimes, Elijah admitted. But helping people makes the fear worth it. They passed the spot where Elijah had once been handcuffed. Jamal stopped. This where it happened? He asked. Elijah nodded. You scared then? Yes. But you didn't give up? No, Elijah said softly. Because I knew who I was. Even if someone else didn't. Jamal looked up at him, face serious. When I grow up, I'm gonna be like you. Elijah knelt down. No, he said gently. You're gonna be better. And Jamal, bright-eyed, wholehearted, smiled like he believed it. On the hospital rooftop that night, Elijah stood alone. The city spread out beneath him. 1,000 lives rushing in 1,000 directions. He thought about his journey, not just the arrest, but the years before and after. The patients he'd saved, the friends he'd buried, the moments that broke him, the ones that built him. He wasn't just a doctor, or a symbol, or a victim. He was a man who kept going, who chose to speak up when silence would have been easier, and who understood, finally, that justice isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. He looked out over the skyline, lights flickering like heartbeats, and he whispered a promise to himself, one he would keep, no matter how long it took. I'll make this count. Because change wasn't something you waited for. It was something you became.